Good afternoon. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was not only an internationally renowned religious leader, philosopher, award-winning author, and respected moral voice, but was a guiding force for world Jewry and leaders across the globe. Today's conversation, which AJC is proud to host as part of the 4th annual Rabbi Sacks Global Day of Learning, will explore Rabbi Sacks's unparalleled impact on global Jewish advocacy and the lessons his life and works offer us. Joining us today are Joanna Benarroch, Global Chief Executive of the Rabbi Sacks Legacy, and Dr. Mijal Bitton, Rosh Kehilla of the Downtown Minyan in New York City and a Sacks scholar. Moderating our conversation is Meggie Fredman, AJC Director of Jewish Communal Partnerships. After we hear from our guests, time permitting, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Meggie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It is such a privilege to have you both here with us, Joanna and Mijal. And with that, let's dive into our conversation. So to help set the stage today, Joanna and Mijal, can you share with us when you first met or learned of Rabbi Sacks? And can you briefly, and I say briefly because both of your answers here actually deserve full programs on their own, but can you briefly describe what your engagement was like with Rabbi Sacks during his lifetime? And maybe Mijal, we'll start first with you.
Well, thank you for having me here. So great to be here. Big fan of AJC's work. Also, big privilege for me to share the stage, the conversation with Joanna in honoring and remembering Rabbi Sacks and everything he taught us. My time with Rabbi Sacks was shorter than Joanna's. You're going to hear from her in a moment. I was very lucky, very privileged to meet him when he was a professor at NYU. He spent 5 years in which he came for part of a semester to NYU, part of a semester to Yeshiva University. At that time, I was a doctoral student at NYU and had just started a community there. And I say that I was very lucky to meet. I had been reading Rabbi Sacks for years, so I had fallen in love with his writings and his ideas and his works. And then I got this amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet him personally and to become his student. So I got to have him in my home, in my community. I got to have meetings with him. There's more to share, but I would say for me, the most important thing was that he gave me, he encouraged me. He gave me the blessing of that encouragement. And he encouraged me also to see myself as a student, which is a title that I carry with me and that is very important to me. So that's just a little bit of how I met Rabbi Sacks. And I'm very proud to be a Sacks scholar. I'm part of an amazing network that Joanna and others have worked to create to continue to spread his messages around the world.
It's beautiful. And I would say, Joanna, I want to turn to you, and I'll just preface for our audience. Joanna's answer, again, deserves a program on its own. But Joanna, briefly, if you can share.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this program as the part of the Global Day of Learning in Rabbi Sacks's memory. And it's an honor to be here with Mijal, Mijal, I must tell you that Rabbi Sacks told me 10 years ago, she's one to watch. So he spotted you. And he loved every minute that he spent with you and felt enlarged by it, as he did with so many conversations that he had. But he really had a very soft spot for you and Sion. Really, for him, it was a pleasure and an honor to be in your home and be with you over that period at NYU. So thank you for all you did to support him. So I had the honor and privilege of working with Rabbi Sacks directly for 23.5 years. But I knew him earlier than that. In 1991, when he became chief rabbi, he was really looking at Anglo Jewry to see where it was going. And he wasn't someone that looked 5 or 10 years in the future. He really wanted to know 20 to 30 years. What did we need to invest in our community now to secure that future? And he created an organization 2 years after he stepped, as he took the role of chief rabbi, called Jewish Continuity. And I had the privilege of being in at the very beginning of that organization, and it really was looking at reinvigorating Jewish life in Great Britain. It was an exciting opportunity for me to have that chance. And then when that organization became part of the UJIA, I moved to the Chief Rabbi's office and worked with him from there within his office, and set up in 2013. In 2011, he approached two of us and said, I've got a lot more to do in my life. Being Chief Rabbi has been an honor and a privilege, but right now I've got a lot more to do, and I've got books to write and people to speak with, and I'm going to step down in 2 years. Will you help me leave the Chief Rabbinate and set up the next steps of my journey? And so we had the most amazing 7 years from 2013 onwards, and it was cut cruelly short in 2020.
I should just say the work, Joanna, you are doing is tremendous. So I want to dive deeper into our conversation. So in 2014, Rabbi Sacks actually addressed AJC's Global Forum in Washington, D.C. I vividly remember being in the audience and our community hanging on to every single word. And in rewatching it recently, it's truly something to marvel at, because he's addressing hundreds of people. There are Jews there from totally different walks of life, literally from around the globe. There are non-Jews there, dignitaries. And what he does is he masterfully weaves together words of Torah, Jewish history. He talks about anti-Semitism, the UN, humor. It's really quite something. But throughout it all, what is clear is it is accessible and engaging to everyone in the ballroom. And creating that level of accessibility is actually quite difficult. As a renowned rabbi and biblical scholar, Rabbi Sacks was deeply knowledgeable and rooted in the particularism of Judaism. But simultaneously, he had this unparalleled knowledge of the universalism of Judaism, morality, ethics, history. And of course, it's quite rare to have a Jewish leader who is able to so expertly navigate both, but Rabbi Sacks was one of those. So my question to both of you is, what motivated him to actively choose to be accessible and impactful in so many different realms, Jewish and secular, and to try to reach such a varied audience? And maybe, Joanna, we'll start with you on this front.
Thank you, Meggie. So I actually went back and listened to his keynote to the AJC Forum in 2014, and it was an amazing speech. And actually, I just want to tell you what to any listeners that haven't heard it, you should go and listen to it, because I think it's as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. But he really paid tribute to the AJC as one of the great organizations of the Jewish world. And he talked about the work of AJC in defending the rights of Jews everywhere, in supporting Israel's right to be standing. And he felt that you as an organization had changed history. And I think that's really important. And I think that's also one of his incredible messages. It wasn't just to make his language and his messages and his wisdom accessible, but it was also to thank people for their contributions to supporting the Jewish community. It was really important for him. He had this incredible phrase called "thank before you think." And the first thing that he did whenever he spoke to an audience was to thank the organizers, whether it was the rabbi in the community that he was visiting or the organization who was hosting him, to make the audience realize how important it was to pay tribute to the important work that you're doing. But I think that Rabbi Sacks felt that he had, whenever he wrote a book, he used to tell us, I'm writing a book to answer a question. And he had lots and lots of deep questions. And the things that he learned along sort of across his life and the work that he put in to develop himself was he wanted to be able to make his ideas accessible to a wider audience, to live a Judaism engaged with the world. So he didn't see his Judaism as separate from the rest of his life. It was an integral part of who he was. And how could he give over that pride of being Jewish, of being a knowledgeable, proud Jew? The way that he communicated was really, really important. That he wasn't born like that. he had to work really, really hard on his delivery, on how he approached people, how he spoke to people. The audience was everything to him. He wanted to know exactly who he was speaking to so that he could tailor his message. He used to say to us, my speeches aren't off the peg. They're tailor-made. Every single one of his speeches was aimed at a specific audience. So to AJC, he would have been very careful as to how his message would be received. Feedback for him was everything. So after he finished his keynote at AJC, he would have sat down and said, guys, well, how was that received? Did everyone understand what I was saying? Was my message accessible? For him, it was imperative. The content, but also the way it was received was really vital to him. But he worked over that over a number of years. It wasn't something that one of his early speeches was in a community in Golders Green, and he went to one of his friends afterwards, and he said to him, how was that? Did everyone get my message? And he said, as far as I'm concerned, you could have been speaking Yiddish. I didn't understand a word. And it was highly academic. But he took that constructive criticism and he ran with it. And for him, that was, and Mijal, wow. You and Gideon were talking about that the other day, how he really wanted that feedback and how to make things better. And Gideon was petrified, Rabbi Gideon Black, that feedback was going to be ill received. And the complete opposite, Rabbi Sacks loved that kind of constructive feedback because it was important to him to always strive to do better. Even when we put him on a pedestal, he wanted to do better and get his message over in the best way possible.
I actually want to dive deeper into kind of those skills and actually working in that practice. And Mijal, this question is for you. Hopefully you can shape this. And Joanna, again, please chime in also here. So I want to turn to advocacy. So at AJC, of course, our mission is one of global Jewish advocacy. Rabbi Sacks, and Joanna, you just touched on so much of this, remains one of the strongest Jewish advocates of our times. For our community, what are some of the best practices or ideas around advocacy that you saw Rabbi Sacks teach or model? And maybe, Mijal, you can kick us off here, especially with the relationship of learning from Rabbi Sacks in that way. So share with us what skills or practices.
Yeah, well, the first thing, I don't know if to call it a skill or a practice or a characteristic, but I believe it's something that can be acquired, even if we don't have it right now. But I think for many of us, what Rabbi Sacks embodied and what made him such a powerful ambassador for our people is this absolute confidence in Judaism. And I really just want to emphasize that. He wasn't, we often talk about having Jewish pride, but many of us are proud, and we don't always know what we are proud of. Rabbi Sacks knew what he was proud of. And what he would say, I believe, is Joanna mentioned how for him, Judaism was an integral part of his being. Rabbi Sacks believed that Judaism had what to contribute to the world, that it was needed by the world. It wasn't just like my flavor of religion, but it was actually like a tradition with potent messages that were a gift to the world. So he had that confidence that he walked in. And for anybody who's trying to do advocacy right now, for our people, I would actually encourage us to ask ourselves, do I have confidence in what it means to be a Jew, in the tradition that I carry in my history? And if not, there's so much that can be learned and can be acquired to carry that in a more powerful way. So that's like one thing that I would put there. There's something, he had a famous phrase that, the non-Jews are proud of Jews who are proud of their Judaism and ashamed by Jews who are ashamed of their Judaism. So that's actually like something really important, and I believe something we can work towards if we don't have it. That confidence in his tradition, in what his parents gave him, in what he learned from Jewish history, that then allowed him to engage in other practices. He formed very powerful and genuine friendships with many people who were very different than him, with Jews, with non-Jews, with political leaders. And a lot of his friendships were very much based on expressing curiosity, on learning from the other, on not making it be a transactional relationship in which I'm just engaging with you to get something out of you. But he would dedicate years, and Joanna can give examples in a very deep way. He would dedicate years in actually getting to know somebody else, learning from them, making them feel respected, that their tradition was also a gift that could contribute to the broader conversation. And in that way, invest in relationships over years that could allow them to work together towards the common good. So there's a lot that we can say here. But again, for me, those two things, having strength in who we are, in our story, in our tradition, and then using that as a way to engage with others genuinely, those are two very important practices and orientations that Rabbi Sacks, I think, can give all of us who are trying to be advocates.
Joanna, anything else to add there on kind of practices towards advocacy?
So I think that exactly as Mijal described, he built up relationships, and for him, conversation was everything. So to have open conversations, but you have to appreciate that the conversations that he had, and often they were behind closed doors, were with, particularly in the UK, whilst he was chief rabbi, were with government ministers, prime ministers. He never ever went to ask them anything until he actually needed. He went to give them help and advice. So he was bringing his proud Jewish wisdom to resolve some of the big issues of our time in the UK. And it was only when it was really, really necessary would he, but when he did ask, they would listen, because he didn't make those asks lightly. And I think for him, making short videos and things accessible, making our materials accessible and his wisdom accessible in small ways to highlight certain issues. So he wasn't that keen on it, although he only told us very late on whiteboard animation videos. He wasn't convinced that they were going to go anywhere, but it was a way of engaging another audience in understanding quite difficult topics and making them accessible. And you have sort of a little bit of a light bulb moment when you watch some of them. You hear his voice, which is so important, but it's also he's telling a story. And I think stories for him were very important as part of advocacy as well.
So
I want to, Meggie,
actually,
can I have an
yeah,
example,
please.
actually, if it's okay?
Yeah.
Just because I feel like for me in this last year, there were moments which have been really hard for all of us. And at times I wasn't sure what to do. And I did find it helpful to go back. I'll give you two very quick examples. One is I was engaging in a live conversation with a faith leader very short after October 7th, who basically said, like, you shouldn't wage war. You should just wage peace. To say that, within a month or so of October 7th. And I was in shock. And I had to respond. And I said, what would Rabbi Sacks say right now? So what I did is I imagined, again, Joanna, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I imagined Rabbi Sacks would probably try to hear, try to say, this is probably why you feel this way, try to give space. And then Rabbi Sacks would speak as a proud Jew and would actually speak with a lot of confidence about what our tradition asks us to do right now. So that was like one example where I felt like I could take directly like the way that Rabbi Sacks would engage and say, okay, what can I do right now? A second thing is he wasn't afraid of, again, mentioning his faith, mentioning God, mentioning tradition, wearing that on our sleeve as something that matters to us and that gives us strength right now.
So it's actually a perfect bridge. I want to take us actually from engagement with, I want to say, the outside external world into what exists within our Jewish community. So really, since 10/7 in the surge of anti-Semitism, we are seeing now many Jews who are doing exactly that, grappling with what it means to be a Jew, religiously, culturally, historically. And one of the greatest gifts, and you've both alluded to this, that Rabbi Sacks gave us are his writings on what it means to be a Jew. I want to read a very brief excerpt from Rabbi Sacks and ask you both to reflect and teach us a bit from it. I want to read a brief excerpt from Rabbi Sacks's A Letter in the Scroll. He says, in quote, "I am a Jew because knowing the story of my people, I hear their call to write the next chapter. I did not come from nowhere. I have a past, and if any past commands anyone, this past commands me. I am a Jew because only if I remain a Jew will the story of 100 generations live on in me. I continue their journey because having come this far, I may not let it and them fail. I cannot be the missing letter in the scroll. I can give no simpler answer, nor do I know a more powerful one, end quote. I would love both of your reflections on these lines, and especially today, and I would say post 10/7, what that means to you, being a Jew. And I'll let you guys choose who wants to jump in first.
So I've been reflecting on this quite a lot, particularly because it was the 20th anniversary of the publication of the paperback of that book in the States this year, 2014, 2004 it came out, and we've done a couple of events around this book, and I think we actually did a very short video about, and Rabbi Sacks talks about walking through a library, and it's the same kind of idea. You walk up and you see there's a book with your name on the spine, and you pull it off the shelf and you see that it's in lots of different languages, and you realize it's the history of your family, and it's taken you back 200 generations. The next page is empty, but it's got your name on the top. Can you put that back on the shelf? Are you going to stop the story there, or are you going to continue the story? And I think we all, and it's being a letter and a scroll, we need to continue that story. And it's a very, very powerful message. And I think Rabbi Sacks all felt that we all have a role to play. And before October 7th, there was a lot of disunity, and I think it's brought us all together. And it's amazing to be in Israel, to see the resilience and everyone's coming together, and being in New York on October 7th and seeing how everyone pulled together amongst the horror. But one of the things I wanted to read to you was actually part of his keynote from 2014. And he said, how can we expect the world to love us if we can't bring ourselves to love one another? How can we expect the world to support us if we cannot support one another? Now's the time to say clearly and categorically, even if we don't share a path or a faith, we certainly share a fate. And we're one family. Argumentative? Definitely. Dysfunctional? Occasionally. But one family. And let there be a bond between us, a bond of indivisible, non-judgmental and unconditional love. And I think that is something that we need to all bear in mind. You know, there's no one that can damage the Jewish people as a Jewish people. And he said, what we need to do is we have to celebrate our Judaism and have less oi and more joy. And why did Judaism survive? Because we never defined ourselves as victims. We never lost our sense of humor. We never, in all the centuries, did we internalize the disdain of the world. And for him, simcha was an integral part of who he was. And even at difficult times, we have this ability to juggle the terrible sadness and the grief and simcha. And I think that's something that, you know, for us, is very important.
Joanna, thank you for that. Simcha, that happiness is, and that joy is so important for us as people. And Mijal, I would love for you to share with us, what does it mean to be a Jew today?
Oh, that was beautiful. I'm still listening to Joanna, what you just shared. So the passage, Meggie, that you read actually brings in two metaphors that Rabbi Sacks used to speak about what it means to be a Jew. One of them Joanna described, which is walking into this library, seeing this book of your family, and then kind of like thinking, wow, they all wrote a story. I maybe get to write one here. That specific metaphor, I mean, there's so much there, but I'll tease out one idea. Part of what that metaphor allows us is to realize that we've inherited something precious. So we are tied to our past. It constitutes us and the world of meaning that we come from. And that doesn't mean that we, in order to continue the story, we actually have to write our own chapter. It has to be our own chapter, in our own language, in our own image, in our own time, with our own passions. There's something very powerful there, which is telling us that to be a Jew is to continue something precious, but that the only way to continue it is if we actually allow ourselves today to become the authors of that. new chapter. So one key idea there that Rabbi Sacks taught us that I think about every day is what it means for us to see ourselves as not just, like, we're not reading someone else's book when we are Jewish, right? We are supposed to see ourselves as the authors of a story. And we are supposed to realize that the future of the Jewish people will be decided by the actions that each of us takes. So to be a Jew is to be a moral agent, is to decide that we are writing the story of our people. That's one metaphor that I believe, especially this last year when so many systems have failed us and so many institutions that we had assumed will be there for us haven't been. There's something there that says, okay, get up. What are you going to write right now? It's up to you. There's no one else who's going to write this story but you. The second metaphor, which was the name of the book in America, The Letter in the Scroll, that was a metaphor that Rabbi Sacks borrowed from Hasidic masters, the Baal Shem Tov, that said that every Jew, each one of us, we are like a letter in a Torah scroll. Now, it sounds curious. Imagine for a second a Torah scroll, right? The parchment, the black letters. If you think about it, it's an incredibly profound metaphor because there's a lot of letters in a Torah scroll, and not all of them seem important. Not every word is that exciting. But there is a powerful Jewish law that says the following. If a single letter is missing from a Torah scroll, the Torah scroll is not valid. It cannot be used, right? The metaphor there, I just want to, it's a powerful one. It means that every single one of us, we are meant to see ourselves as a letter in a Torah scroll. Without one letter, the covenant, the scroll, the story is not complete. And when we are next to each other, right, our letters are next to each other, going back to what Joanna said about Jewish unity, we can form words, we can form sentences and paragraphs and tell a new story. To me, so much of this comes down to the following. To be a Jew today, or maybe like aspirationally, okay, what it means to be a Jew is to feel needed, is to understand that our story and our covenant depends on us and our actions, and that we get to write this new chapter.
First of all, that was just beautiful words that you both shared with us. And I want to take us actually both from the individualized elements of being a Jew and also peoplehood and unity to the external world outside of the Jewish community. I want to turn actually to what Rabbi Sacks did around education and advocacy and combating anti-Semitism. So AJC has proudly, and Joanna, you referenced it earlier, proudly utilized Rabbi Sacks' animation series. So I hope there is some gratification there about how impactful it is in our education and training efforts. Recently, we actually used mutation of anti-Semitism when we trained tens of thousands of Lufthansa employees around the world. So there really is enormous reach. Today, we are experiencing rates of anti-Semitism in the Western world that we naively thought were relics of the past. During his life, and it's actually really, I would say, impressive for those to go back and look at Rabbi Sacks' writing, he spoke about the dangers of anti-Semitism and the need for education and allyship, I think actually before many raised the alarm. He was actually very early in that. I'm wondering, what do you think he understood about the rise of anti-Semitism, that he acknowledged this so early, that so many, I think, did not see when he was raising that alarm? And Joanna, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you. I think he refers back to 2001 when he's speaking, when his daughter was at a rally for I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was not a rally on anti-Semitism. It quickly turned, I think it was CND, something like that. And it quickly turned anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. And his daughter came home from this rally and she must have been in her late teens. And she said, "Dad, they hate us." And he was so shocked. And he talks about the fact that in 50 years, he had never experienced anti-Semitism himself. And it really shocked him to the core. And then he started researching and reading about it. And he was shocked to find that anti-Semitism was rising again in his lifetime. And he really believed very strongly up until that point and never again. He really didn't feel that this could happen in the memory of the Holocaust. And he talked about that Jews are often the canaries in the mine. And what he said was that the appearance of anti-Semitism is always an early warning sign of a dangerous dysfunction within a culture, because the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. And he said a world without room for Jews is one that has no room for difference, and a world that lacks space for difference lacks space for humanity itself. And that was the beginning of, and it took him probably 15 years to write it, of the book that we now know as Not in God's Name. And he felt it was a book that he had to write. He felt that we didn't do enough active listening between ourselves, that othering had already begun, where you really can't see someone who's different from yourself. You can't see the similarities. And a lot of the conversations that he had with other faith leaders, he used to say it's very difficult to come to an agreement on the differences between our faiths, but if we work together, when you build up friendships, then there's more chance of us not othering somebody not like us. And then you realize between the conversations that they're actually much more like us. He couldn't write that book as chief rabbi. He wrote it the first year that he stepped down as chief rabbi, because there were too many issues that he needed to raise that he felt that he couldn't do as chief rabbi. He needed to be more free and out of office to do that. But it deeply upset him to see this rise in anti-Semitism. And I think he felt let down by others for not addressing it in a stronger fashion. And so he took it to the European Union and others to really raise concerns.
Yeah, and I would say again that foresight is something that I think all of us should be incredibly appreciative of. Mijal, anything to add there before we turn to another topic?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, I think the two big kind of like insights that Rabbi Sacks had on anti-Semitism that were way ahead of his time was, number one, describing it as a mutation that kind of like takes on different forms, even as it has a similar kind of like, somewhat similar DNA. And the second thing, the way that he described the current mutation, and when I read his early writings, I'm like, I can't believe he called it then, was the weaponization of human rights discourse to attack the one Jewish state. And the fact, like, he saw that early on. Now, why did he see that early on? Why did they have this foresight? I'll just add a little bit to what Joanna said. One is he was in Europe, which I think was the cradle of many of these ideas that were really like rising up. The second thing I think is that he had like this very, very deep knowledge of Jewish history. And I think once you have knowledge of Jewish history, it's easier to not only get caught up in like the here and now and to remember, well, what happened in medieval Spain and what happened in this country at this time. And the third thing is that he thought a lot about how we can have a healthy society. He didn't just think about Jews, he thought about liberal democracy. And he knew that anti-Semitism was one of the dangers to any stable and good society. So he recognized early on the kind of fissures in liberal democracy that we were seeing and the kind of threats to freedom. He cared a lot about freedom. And anti-Semitism for him is both something that has to do with Jews, but also it's just something that has to do with what it means to live in a free society. And for him, it was very clearly a call to action. Because the hatred that begins with Jews doesn't end with Jews, and he believed we have to find partners outside of our community to fight this.
And I should just say, and you both raised this so beautifully, so much of the language that you see in his writing, like you said, is language that we use in all of our work now. Yeah. I want to turn to peoplehood before we get to our final question. So we are speaking here in the US, at least weeks after the US presidential election. We have seen a lot of division in this country, and that divisiveness has really bled over into a lot of American Jewish life. In Israel, we saw very powerful unity in the immediate aftermath of the horrors of 10/7, but we have now seen many of those societal fractures return. What lessons specifically about Jewish peoplehood can you share in this moment from Rabbi Sacks? And maybe Mijal, I know you wrote a beautiful piece on this, so I actually will turn to you first to share what we can take about peoplehood in this moment and the need for Jewish unity.
Yeah, I think Rabbi Sacks would say, and he wrote about this so much, that he was a student of Jewish history, that what ended up bringing down Jewish kingdoms was never the enemy at the doors. It was always division from within. So I believe his first message would be to remind us that this is not like a luxury. It's not like a feel-good thing, that it is literally a necessity for our survival, and that it must be a priority for us to not just think about enemies outside, but to figure out how do we remain a people. That's one lesson he would give. I think another lesson, and this is a little bit tied to the piece I wrote, Meggie, the pain you're feeling is Jewish peoplehood. I think he would remind us that being a Jew is being part of a family, that it's not necessarily sharing the same ideology or the same theology, the same denomination, the same politics. It's being a family. It's feeling each other's pain. It's, rejoicing with each other's joy. And that is not just, maybe I'm going to add to what I think he might have shared as well now. I think he would say we have to work on this. Sometimes, families, like Joanna said, are dysfunctional. And there's fissures appearing now, which means we need to work harder. Like, it's not just going to all figure itself out, but when we have a family and we care, we think about your own family. We can do things to come closer, to insist on relationship. The last thing I said, I think he would remind us, and he wrote about this as well, is Rabbi Sacks did not advocate for uniformity of views. He believed in machlokat l'shem shamayim, what we call like a disagreement for the sake of heaven. So you can have unity without uniformity. You can have Jewish peoplehood without flattening the differences between us. You can be really passionate and advocate for what you believe in, while at the same time offering care and love to Jews you disagree with. So I believe he would urge us to make this be a priority, to not just assume that it's just going to continue this way, but that we have to invest in this as the most important project for the survival of the Jewish people.
That's a beautiful note there. I want to just ask one final question before we open to audience question and answer. And Joanna, as both you and I have, I want to reference one more time the words that Rabbi Sacks addressed at our global forum. So I want to read a quick quote from there and ask you both to reflect on this. So he closed our global forum with this. He said, in quote, "Friends, consider this extraordinary historical fact. Jews in history have been attacked by some of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Empires that bestrode the narrow world like a colossus that seemed invulnerable in their time. Egypt of the pharaohs, Assyria, Babylonia, the Alexandrian Empire, the Roman Empire, the medieval empires of Christianity and Islam, all the way up to the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. Each one of these seemingly invulnerable empires has been consigned to history, while our teeny people can still stand and sing Am Yisrael Chai." I have chills just from reading it. But my question for both of you is, what lessons of hope and resilience, both from these words, but also from knowing Rabbi Sacks, what lessons of hope and resilience can you share with us before we turn to our audience? And maybe Joanna, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Rabbi Sacks always talked about hope. And for him, it was absolutely an imperative part of being a Jew. And I'm just going to quote a little bit because I don't want to misquote him, but he talked about optimism and hope not being the same thing. And optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world a better place. Optimism is a passive virtue, whereas hope is an active one. And it takes no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. And what he used to say was that to be a Jew is to be an agent of hope. Every ritual, every command, every syllable of the Jewish story is a protest against escapism, resignation, and the blind acceptance of faith. Judaism, the religion of the free God, is a religion of freedom. Jewish faith is written in the future tense. It is a belief in a future that's not yet, that could be. And if we heed God's call, his will, and act together as a covenantal community, the name of the Jewish future is hope. And Hatikva, he would refer to it on a regular basis. This is who we are, and we have to have hope. and we have to work together to have hope. And he felt that we were a very resilient people. As you said, you know, the emperors of history have been consigned to history, and we're still here. Are small people, but we have to work together. It's really, really important. And that he was always looking forward to the future. And he would say, you just have to walk into a school to see hope. You see our children learning their Torah and their tefillot together, their prayers. And he said, looking on the children's faces, you see the future shining in their eyes. And that's where he felt schools were the bastion of the future. And for him, it was really imperative to really invest in our kids, in the next generation, so that we have a very solid future ahead of us.
Beautiful. Mijal, to close that before we get to questions.
Yeah, I
hope
would
and
say,
resilience.
yeah, I would say for me, so much of this last year, the place where I get my hope from is engaging with thousands of Jews here in America who have been, we can use the word like reawakened to their Judaism and to Jewish destiny. And I'll say, you know, there's some data on it. JFNA has a study that calls it the surge. And it's interesting because people will, when I mention this data and the awakening that I see, people will often come to me and say, well, but this is probably temporary. Like things are bad now, so a bunch of people have woken up, but you know, how can we make sure it doesn't go away? And this is the answer that I have begun to give because I believe in it. Of course, whenever there's crisis, we're going to have an awakening, and whenever things get better, God willing, you know, there's less of an awakening. But certain things can happen that can change the world. As an example, Rabbi Sacks writes about his own journey, that he was studying philosophy in university, and he was probably going to become like an academic or like an economist or whatever, a philosopher. And then he lived through the 6-Day War, and he was part of what I'm going to call a surge in 1967 of individuals who woke up and heard the call of history and who had an awakened Jewish identity. And just think, if just like one person like Rabbi Sacks, that activated him to become the Rabbi Sacks that we know now, that gives me hope. And that is also, I would say, it's not just hope. Like Joanna said, hope is not passive. That is a responsibility for all of us in this call, right? To figure out, where do we see those places of opportunity, of strength, and how do we make sure that we do everything in our capacity to build bridges with those outside of our community, and to encourage people who are re-engaged now to say, well, now you get to write the new chapter, and we can build something extraordinary together.
I want to encourage, first of all, I think what a beautiful note to end on, of really holding on to that responsibility and carrying that responsibility. And with that, I see a lot of audience questions coming in, so I want to give the opportunity for that.
Thanks, Meggie. Our first question is actually coming from a lot of people who are saying, if we want to start to learn more about Rabbi Sacks's teachings, what do you recommend is a good place to start for someone who is less familiar? And Joanna, we can start.
Thank you. I think actually the book that Maggie's referenced and that we've talked about a lot, A Letter in the Scroll, is probably a very good book to start with. And it's certainly the sort of the bedrock, and his explanation of what it is to be a Jew. But I also think that if you want to dip in and have a look at our website, we've worked very hard to bring together all of his writings, as many as that we possibly can, lots of video, and you can search for a topic and see what interests you. So come on that journey with us and take a look into Rabbi Sacks's world.
Yeah, maybe I'll add 2 things to what Joanna said. One is, I encourage you to sign up to get the Covenant and Conversation essays. 15 minutes, I think 15 minutes tops to read it, yeah? 15 minutes a week to just read an essay that draws from the Torah portion, that strengthens our Jewish knowledge, and that relates to big questions we are all interfacing with every day. So it's like a small way to engage. And I would say that I would also recommend for anybody who wants to read his book, Morality. It's a book that's written in a more universal way. So what I mean to say is, he's writing there, you know, like very, very globally about like concerns around our ability to work together, but it incorporates a lot of his philosophy and the way that he thought about liberal democracy, the common good. So I would actually Lettering the Scroll and Morality to me are like almost like companions for each other, and both very readable.
I think also Morality is the most recent book. That was the last book that he published before he passed away.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Richard Berkman and others who are asking several questions, but the first about Rabbi Sacks's interfaith advocacy. What was his approach? And related, how would he advocate for democracy in today's overly political world? And to fight anti-Semitism and support Israel effectively, would Rabbi Sacks agree that we first have to protect our democracy?
Mijal, you should take.
Okay, there were three or four questions there. I'm still trying to sharpen them. Joanna, I'll let you describe his interfaith work because I think you saw it, really close up. Maybe I'll just address a little bit about democracy. So one of the things Rabbi Sacks wrote about, and this is some themes you see developed in his writings and teachings over years. So this was a core belief for him. He believed that one of the problems in liberal democracy and in the West is that over decades, we developed a social morality in which we thought mainly about our interests and our rights. I'm saying, we use the word very, very, very individualistic. For Rabbi Sacks, this wasn't just something that wasn't good, it was actually toxic and dangerous. It could literally endanger the project of liberal democracy. And he writes a lot in his book about how basically, I'm not going to do justice to the full theory, so I'm saying it quickly here, but he writes that many citizens in liberal democracies, so for him, this wasn't just Jews, this were citizens in all liberal democracies, that we outsourced our questions of moral concerns to the state or the market. So basically, we looked at what politicians could do or what the market and capitalism could do. For him, part of what we were meant to do is to actually come back to a different conversation that involves speaking about the common good. Again, I want to emphasize this for Rabbi Sacks wasn't just a nice Dvar Torah, a nice piece of Jewish wisdom. He used a lot of philosophy and psychology to argue that unless we in our society can articulate a vision of common good, we are not going to have a small democracy. He really, really cared about democracy, about freedom. I don't know if he would prioritize democracy over anti-Semitism. He saw those as intertwined with each other, and he believed we needed to have a shared project. I'll say one more thing. He spoke a lot about what he would call cultural climate change. What happens in a society where values of caring about each other basically become disintegrated. And the way that he ended his book on morality is by saying the difference with climate change and our cultural climate change and our moral problems is that we can actually start very small and make a very big difference. So he basically, sorry, I'm just saying a lot quickly, he would advocate and say, don't wait, start small. You want to fix democracy? You want to fix society? Don't wait for big, huge solutions or for the market and the political system to change things. Think about your community. Think about what it means to be a good neighbor. He had a whole theory that only by doing that across many places, we can actually make things better. So he definitely had a lot to say about our need to strengthen liberal democracy.
And he also, I'll add to that, he also talked about a covenantal society. Rather than a contractual society. So a contract, you enter into a contract between you and me. Covenantal, you're invested together. So you're building something together. And that for him was really, really imperative, and it underpinned the book. And he talked over a number of years about covenantal society, and that's Covenants and Conversation, his weekly. It was a covenant between God and the Jewish people, but it's also a covenant with the world. On interfaith, he over a number of years built up incredible relations with his counterparts in other faiths in the UK. And for him, building up those relationships that you could work together and cross boundaries where you might not agree on certain issues of faith, but you could certainly work together on anything where you needed to, whether it was over healthcare or the economy. And he regularly entertained other faith leaders, and they came together to work through ideas. He was, I think, probably the first Jew to address the Lambeth Conference, which is where all the bishops come together. And he was a very respected figure because he was proud of who he was as a Jew and brought his Judaism and his values to bear, and he made others proud of their faith because of the pride that he took in his own faith. So it was very important to him. But he also had a phrase called side by side, because he said often the face-to-face work that you do with interfaith leaders doesn't always work. But if you work side by side with someone, you get to know them and do projects together, you have a lot more success.
Our next
Maybe can I-
question.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I want to add a question that I would want to ask Rabbi Sacks today, if Rabbi Sacks was here with us. I think and I'm just naming it here because I'm assuming this is relevant to some folks in this webinar. Part of what's been really hard for me as someone who does believe in interfaith work is that there's been many spaces in the last year and a half where there's been, I would say, almost like a litmus test or conditions, like where if I'm a Zionist and if I am a proud Jew in the way that I, with the beliefs that I have, where I wouldn't be invited to dialogue. So that's been, I'll just name it, like a big obstacle to interfaith work. And I would have loved to be able to hear Rabbi Sacks's wisdom about that. I would guess, again, I can just guess, I would guess that he would not, how do I say this? That he would seek partners in dialogue, but not if that came at the cost of having to not share his views and like his core commitments about his people and who we are and what we're supposed to do. So that's a very delicate, complicated place to be, to not give up hope, right? And to keep looking for partners. And at the same time, to have that confidence in our own story that we won't engage if the price for engagement is that we give up on our story.
And I think to add to that, I'm hearing from one of them is a Sacks scholar, the rabbis in the UK, is that they are struggling and they've lost the partners. There's one rabbi particularly that does a huge amount of interfaith work, and he's struggling because his voice can't be heard right now, and he's not willing to give up what he stands for so proudly in order to have those engagements. And it's very disappointing to see that.
On that vein, our next question comes from Carla Rader in Atlanta, who's asking, I'm a college student and it's been a very difficult time over the last year. How would Rabbi Sacks teach us or advise us to overcome the rampant campus anti-Semitism that we've been seeing, especially when we're either excluded from the conversation or people are unwilling to engage with us? And how do we proceed when we see such diverse and even anti-Zionist opinions from our own Jewish peers on campus?
I think AJC is doing amazing work in that space, and it's a real challenge. I think it would give him such pain to see what's going on right now, but I think he would be working extremely hard to have conversations where you could with presidents of universities, but it's a very difficult place at the moment. I think AJC and Mijal probably a better place to answer that right now.
Well, I'm just trying, what's the name of the student who asked the question?
Carla Rader.
Carla, sorry. Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I'm really glad you're here. And I work with a lot of college students, and I hear this from many of them. Again, I don't know what Rabbi Sacks would say. I can be inspired by what he taught us. I would say that he would encourage you and college students to, first of all, go to Shabbat dinner. Make sure that you're part of a Jewish community. Find spaces where you're not fighting, but you're just enveloped in what it means to celebrate being Jewish. I think he would encourage us to study history and study examples of great people who went through difficult things to remind us that we can do it also. I think he would encourage us to remember that the voices that we hear are very loud and they must be confronted, but that we can probably find some other voices that we can talk to and try to do it even if it's in a small scale. But I think above everything else, if Rabbi Sacks were to hear your question, I think he would encourage you and would remind you that we have strength that we don't realize we have, and that we can continue writing the story of our people and to strengthen each other.
And our last question, before I turn it back to you, Meggie, is from Eileen Engel, who's asking, what more can we do to bring in younger people, Jews and non-Jews alike, to see themselves as students and learners? And from many on Zoom who are asking, how can we as an audience help Rabbi Sacks's legacy and teachings live on?
Very good question. I think we can all, Rabbi Sacks was learning his whole life. And he said that the young, even however old you are, if you keep on learning, you're young at heart. And I think for him, it was learning from others, learning from conversations that he had. Whenever he spoke, he would read absolutely everything around the subject. So he had something new to bring to the conversation. We should all be lifelong learners. I think we are better people for learning from what life has taught us and from all the amazing people that surround us. And in terms of learning more about what we're doing, as Mijal said, please join our mailing list at rabbisacks.org, and there are many Zoom conversations and learning opportunities around the world that people can, and I think you've put it in the chat, thank you, that you can join and be part of the Rabbi Sacks family, and we encourage you to join us and be part of it.
Yeah, I would say to the question as to young people, I love our young people. I think that we have, I think it's amazing. I think we in the organized Jewish community, we have to do a lot of work to make sure that we are turning to young Jews, whatever we want to describe that as, and giving more opportunities for leadership, to not just feel like a participant, but to feel like a stakeholder. And I think when we do that well, I'm very lucky. I run a community for young Jews in their 20s and 30s in Lower Manhattan. And I've met with so many students, and I am amazed by the strength and the poise that so many of them bring to our people. So I think that we have to figure out how we can make more space for leadership and how we can encourage right now.
I think what Rabbi Sacks would say is, good leaders create followers, great leaders create leaders. And I think that's really imperative that our young people step up, feel that they can be part of something. And that's leadership is something that he believed very strongly in, and being part of a community is one way to do that.
Back to you, Meggie.
Thank you. First of all, if I may, I want to give one other suggestion of how to stay connected to Rabbi Sacks' work. Sign up at the website that was shared for his daily quotes. It really does fill you with inspiration every day to receive them. With that, I want to thank you, Joanna and Mijal, for your tremendous wisdom and for spending time with our audience today. And importantly, upholding the legacy of Rabbi Sacks, both in teaching us as Jews, as leaders, and as citizens of the world. And thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, Mijal, and Meggie, for today's important and inspiring conversation. And thank you to our global audience for tuning in today. As we shared on the program, to learn more about the Rabbi Sacks legacy, head to rabbisacks.org. If you'd like to join American Jewish Committee in advocating for the Jewish people around the world, please consider making a year-end donation to AJC. If you make a gift before December 31st, it will be doubled. Please visit ajc.org/donate. Thank you again, and goodbye.